Committee, I want to note that we have a piece of written testimony at your seat regarding House Bill 2366, requiring prosecutors to disclose their intent to introduce testimony from a jailhouse witness and to forward information to the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. The proponent testimony from Americans for Prosperity Kansas was in the electronic material the day that we heard House Bill 2366, but the written copy was not also in your committee folder. So we have now distributed the written copy of the electronic testimony that was online for our hearing. So now your committee folder regarding House Bill 2366 can be complete. And that is written only proponent testimony from Elizabeth Patton, State Director of Americans for Prosperity, Kansas. And the hearing date was February 7th, 2022. Have another note to make that we have a birthday in committee today, our esteemed Vice Chair and Vice President of the Senate. So happy birthday, Senator Wilborn. And may you have another successful trip around the sun this next year. And I think we had some other February birthdays earlier in the month, around February 4th, February 6th, February 8th. So we were not meeting that week. As you remember, we were anticipating the storm, the snow that came. So I apologize we weren't in committee those days, to wish those committee members a happy birthday as well. With that then, committee, we will take a brief recess today at 11:25. There is an opportunity that some senators want to join at 11:30, and then we will reconvene at 11:40 if we are not yet completely done with our business by 11:25. We do have a bill to hear, and then I wanted to work as many bills as we could so we can get done on time. And we have February 21st is the last day that committees can meet and hear bills that originate in the Senate chamber. So we want to make sure that we hear those that are going to be heard this session, that we have time for. So with that then, we will open the hearing on Senate Bill 419, which is allowing special agents from the Department of Corrections to attend the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center. And for the bill brief, we will hear from Mr. Reviser, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you mentioned, Senate Bill 419 deals with some employees of the Department of Corrections attending the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center. We have new Section 1 there at the front of the bill that would allow the Secretary of Corrections, with the consent of the Director of Police Training at the Law Enforcement Training Center, to designate an employee other than a special agent to attend the LETC or any training school certified pursuant to KSA 74-5604A, which is part of the Law Enforcement Training Act, or to attend courses provided by the training center or training schools. The employee and the department would be required to receive a transcript of the courses successfully completed by the employee. So that is what that new section allows. And then Section 2 amends the definition section of the Law Enforcement Training Act, KSA 74-5602, to include special agents of the Department of Corrections in the definition of a police officer or law enforcement officer. And obviously by including them in that definition, that triggers a number of both obligations and opportunities under the Law Enforcement Training Act. So I will point out, and I'm assuming the conferees may tell you this too, but if you were following along last year, or I'm sorry, in the 2020 session, this bill did end up in the Senate, in the Senate committee, but it was not heard. It was HB 2695. It came over from the House in March of 2020, and then everything happened in 2020, and it died in the Senate committee in May of 2020. So it did pass the House 125-0 in 2020, and again, due to COVID, we did never hear it in the Senate committee. So it's back now as SB 419, and I'll take questions.
Thank you. Committee questions for the reviser? Seeing none. The House bill number, if I'm correct, was House Bill 2695. Correct. 125-0 in the House in 2020 session.
Correct.
Seeing no questions, then we'll go ahead and hear from our first proponent conferee in person, Randy Bowman, Executive Director of Public Affairs, Kansas Department of Corrections. Please introduce yourself and welcome back to committee.
Thank you. Okay, it is on. Randy Bowman, Executive Director of Public Affairs for the Kansas Department of Corrections. It's a privilege to be back before you all for the first time this year. And first, just a thank you to the chairperson and you as the committee for taking this topic up for consideration. As Jason very effectively and thoroughly covered, we had this moving along in 2020, and then like so many things for all of us in our lives, we just weren't able to cross the finish line. So I'll be pretty brief today, just kind of refresh our memories is kind of my thought about what we're trying to accomplish here. And hopefully we're presenting something that's a fairly simple process, but obviously not everything is as simple as it may first appear sometimes. But with this bill, the goal is to get our enforcement, apprehensions, and investigations special agents the same level of training and qualifications as the police officer or the sheriff's deputy in your community. I can't get you any information on the history of why they've not been specifically included in this act or been able to get the training historically, but it's been a barrier for the department for many, many years in getting the right kind of training for them because they are out there in the field working in our parole offices to essentially primarily apprehend absconders from parole supervision. So that absconder is going to end up in our communities, in any places, in a house, in a car, in a whatever. So the correct way to go to that house and safely enter the house and find the person and extract them from the house is a pretty important part of their work. And that has, this is a public safety bill for them. It's a public safety bill for the members of our community, in my thinking too, because that needs to happen safely and not impact the neighbors to that home, ideally, when somebody needs to be picked up and returned back to a county jail and eventually, if the evidence is sufficient, back to prison. So we want to get them the same skills. Then additionally, those agents work on various law enforcement task forces with the U.S. Marshal and with local law enforcement, where they're working side by side doing law enforcement work, and it would be safer for everybody involved if they had the same training and the same tactics. So if one of our agents is alongside somebody from here at the Shawnee County Sheriff's Department, for example, everybody being on the same page as to this is how we're going to do this is when we're going to do this is the safe way for us all to accomplish our mission and get back out of that home, in my example, is really, really important. So I hope we could gain your support in getting this piece of legislation passed this time, since we don't have the 2020 to live with in the same way. One other little piece of background I just want to make sure I shared with y'all. Today, we sometimes are able to hire officers who come from a law enforcement agency, so they bring that skill set and that training with them, but they can't they can do the continuing education, they go to the classes, but they can't submit it to KLETC to get credit. So 5 years in, if you're not sustaining that, you lose your commission as a law enforcement officer. So they're not keeping up on the skills, then they lose their commission, which is important to them as an individual. Any of us would get a credential or a college education or whatever. We don't want that to slip away, but that's effectively happening for some of these staff. So wins for the agency, wins for the public, wins for our law enforcement partners and the employees, we hope, as well. Final thing I would just share with the group, because it was asked in 2020, I don't know if it's on your minds today, but just to put you at ease with it. The question was, if this was available, would they be required as a condition of their employment to have this certification? And that is the intent of the Secretary. So if they're not, they will go back through the training, they'll get it, and they'll have to maintain their certification, which is, again, good for the public as well, because if they made a mistake in their personal lives, then CPOST and others would look into that and take the appropriate actions. So with that, thank you, and I would stand for questions now or later, whatever's appropriate, Chair.
Thank you very much, and we'll just go ahead and hold all the questions till the end of the testimony. With that, then, we will invite our next proponent, conferee, Ed Klump, Legislative Liaison, Kansas Sheriff's Association, Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police, and Kansas Peace Officers Association. I think I'm almost saying that as well as you do, Ed, maybe not so quite as fast, but please.
We can get pretty fast at that. I
Exactly.
appreciate you listening to my own. I'm Ed Klump with the associations that the chair listed. This was an important bill for our associations to support. It's not our bill, clearly, it's DOC's bill. But for the reasons Randy stated, we work side by side with these officers, and these are the officers at DOC that work more outside the walls than within the walls. And we work side by side with them in looking for absconders, looking for parole violators, and other violators that DOC is interested in picking up. Oftentimes, that's related to a task force, as Randy mentioned, but oftentimes it's just they're going out to a house and they call our agencies to assist them. Or we run into one of their people they're looking for and we call them to assist us. It's very important that we have similar training and we understand each other's training, what we're going to do, how we respond to different things as events unfold that sometimes don't go as we plan. And so this training is very important for the safety of our officers, the safety of their officers, but more importantly, the safety of the public and the people we're apprehending. So we support this bill wholeheartedly, and we urge you to pass it favorably. And with that, I'll stand for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other proponent conferees in the committee meeting room or online? Seeing none then, committee, I will direct your attention. Do we have the committee folders at our seats, or do we need to stand at ease for a moment for committee folders? I think we do have those, so okay, great. In your committee folder, you will find proponent written only testimony from Brian Clark, President, Kansas State Troopers Association, Robert Jacobs, Executive Officer, Kansas Bureau of Investigation, Colonel Herman Jones, Superintendent, Kansas Highway Patrol, Tony Moe, President, Kansas Gang Investigators Association, Doug Schroeder, Executive Director, Kansas Commission on Peace Officers Standards and Training, Casey Slaughter, President, Kansas State Fraternal Order of Police, John Sturgeon, President, Kansas Internal Affairs Investigators Association, Sheriff Monty L. Huey, Butler County Sheriff's Office, Sheriff Calvin Hayden, Johnson County Sheriff's Office, Sheriff Andrew D. Dedecki, Leavenworth County Sheriff's Office, Sheriff Scott King, Pawnee County Sheriff's Office, Sheriff Jeffrey T. Easter, Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office, and Sheriff Daniel Sopcich, Wyandotte County Sheriff's Office. With that, then, we will open it up for questions from the committee for any of our proponent conferees. Yes, Senator Thompson and then Senator Haley.
Just one quick question for Randy, I think. Do you anticipate 2 officers going every year? It looks that way from the fiscal note.
If you'll go ahead and introduce yourself, those following online. Thank you.
Randy Bowman, Kansas Department of Corrections again. I think we could see that 1 or 2 that KLETC put in there, especially initially as we kind of catch these folks up. But hopefully we retain people a little better in the long run, and it might not be that forever.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Randy.
Thank you, sir.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Haley?
Quasi-related. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just kind of curious. I'm concerned about, I'm very supportive of the bill. I want to have the highest qualifications. And how is recruitment coming? We've heard about shortages already, both in corrections and in general for law enforcement. In terms of recruitment for new hires, is there any way that this might dovetail to encourage or find some others? I'm very concerned, certainly, about the staff shortages that we have. And I know it's not directly on point with what we're talking about, but if you can opine briefly for what we might be doing here to augment that for better qualified or staff in general, I appreciate it.
Do my best,
Mr.
Madam
Bowman.
Chair and Senator, thank you for that question. Yeah, as we've appeared before a lot of other committees, and you've heard us talk about, if you're on some of those or your colleagues, no doubt, yeah, we are in a staffing crisis without a doubt. Thankfully, the governor, the Spark Committee, the leadership of the House, and the Joint Committee last fall made some good recommendations and took some actions in December. So the temporary pay differentials just hit paychecks 3 weeks ago, I believe, for some of those officers. So the meat of it, we saw 3 weeks in a row since those took effect where our curve, if you will, of staff vacancies going like this for the last year plus are beginning to tip. We're also seeing a little bit increase in job applicants of late as well. So we're hopeful that is the beginning of a trend that will take still months. Not hopeful it takes months, but hopeful it's the trend. It will take many months for us to get back to staffing levels where we need to be, but maybe there's an early sign.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Bowman, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Committee, other questions? I want to thank our conferees and for the work you're doing for our law enforcement community as well. We have been hearing that we're having recruiting problems and retention problems, so the legislature is aware, and thank you for presenting those issues to us today as well. And with that then, I will invite, are there any neutral or opponent conferees in the committee meeting room or online? Seeing and hearing none then, we will close the hearing on Senate Bill 419. Thank you, committee. And with that then, we can turn to our committee folders, which I think need to be distributed so we can work on some bills previously heard. So we'll stand at ease for a minute. Thank you very much to our committee assistant, Ms. Sage, and Ms. Nelson from Research. Appreciate that. So committee, you should have your committee folder in front of you, and we will then work House Bill 2231. And we will then ask for a bill brief from the reviser, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So House Bill 2231, you may recall from the other day, looks like February 1st, we heard that. That's the bill amending the definition of the crime of conducting a pyramid promotional scheme. Its main purpose is, excuse me, to provide an exemption from the definition so that certain plans or operations where you purchase goods or services for personal use or consumption are not considered pyramid schemes as long as the plan or operation does not cause inventory loading. And remember, that's a defined term in the Act that has to do with whether someone could use what they're required to buy in a reasonable amount of time, just as one example. And the other thing it does is define a few other terms that are used there in the bill. So, sorry, the main one being inventory loading, which I already mentioned. The thing I would point out again to the committee, and I think I did this at the time, this is a 2021 session bill. It's a carryover bill. And so we have 3 places where 2020 SUP is mentioned. Thankfully, the statute was not amended last year, so all you have to do is change the date. We don't have to do a substitute or anything. And if you're following along and you want to know which dates would be changed, if you were to work this bill, I'd recommend you change the dates in line 3, 6 on page 1, and 24 on page 2. So the 3 places where 2020 appears, those should be 2021. So if you were to move the bill forward, I'd recommend you make that technical amendment.
Thank you. Committee questions for the reviser. Senator Pyle.
I'll make that motion to do what he just said.
Okay, thank you. So that was a motion to make the technical date amendments to the bill. Do we have a second? Senator Thompson. Committee, you've heard the motion. Any discussion? Seeing none, then all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The motion passes. We're back on the bill. Yes, Senator Gossage.
Madam Chair, I move that we pass Bill 2231 as amended favorably out of this committee.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Senator Thompson? You've all heard the motion. Any discussion? Seeing none then, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The motion carries. Thank you, committee. We will then turn and work some bills that we have heard again this month, I believe, and that would be Senate Bill 366, specifying that the crime of burglary includes, without authority, entering into or remaining within any locked or secured portion of any dwelling, building, or other structure with intent to commit another crime therein. Senate Bill 366, and we'll ask for a bill brief from the reviser, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. As you mentioned, Senate Bill 366 is the bill dealing with the crime of burglary and making clear that it includes, without authority, entering into or remaining within any locked or secured portion of any dwelling, building, or other structure with intent to commit another crime therein. Essentially, it adds that piece of language about locked or secured portion to a handful of subsections already in the crime of burglary. This was requested by the Kansas County and District Attorneys Association in response to some case law that we have indicating whether or not those portions of dwellings or churches, was the other example given, are covered. The court said they were not in a couple of cases, and this would change that policy, and that's what you're asked to do here. It looks like you heard this on January 31st, if that helps you find your notes, and hopefully that refresher. I'll see if you have any questions.
Thank you. And committee, this is not a carryover bill, so there's no need for technical date amendments like we heard from the reviser. Any questions for the reviser? Any discussion on the bill? If none, then the chair would entertain a motion. Yes, Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that we pass Senate Bill 366 out favorably.
Thank you. Is there a second? Senator Bowers? Sorry. Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none then, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The motion carries. Thank you, committee. We will then turn to Senate Bill 367. That's requiring officers to file copies of receipts with the court when property is seized under a search warrant, and providing requirements and procedures for destruction or disposition of dangerous drugs and return or disposition of weapons. And we'll ask for the bill brief from the reviser, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. As you mentioned, Senate Bill 367 does require filing of certain copies of receipts with the court when property is seized under a search warrant. Also has some requirements and procedures for destruction or disposition of dangerous drugs and the return or disposition of weapons. This was heard on January 31st. You'll recall that it was at the request of the three law enforcement associations that Mr. Klump represents. And this is a reintroduction, essentially, of 2019 Senate Bill 133 that passed out of this committee but did not get above the line in the Senate. So there's all of the background information that I had. The main changes here are just to the statute in our criminal procedure code that deal with custody and disposition of property seized by law enforcement under a search warrant or validly seized without a warrant. So this is the criminal side, not to be confused with the civil forfeiture side. I think we had that discussion back in the hearing. We got two separate processes, one for criminal evidence seizure and one for civil asset forfeiture that's in Chapter 60. This is just the criminal side. And the biggest thing I think the proponents were asking you to do as far as the policy choice is the change related to weapons and the return of firearms. It provides a number of new pieces that would say what happens with a firearm when you're determining who can have that firearm and who the law enforcement agency could return it to. You might have someone who's prohibited from having it returned to them, but maybe their child could have it, or maybe they want it transferred to a firearms dealer. And so there are provisions dealing with the disposition of firearms. That's the main, I think, policy choice you're being asked here.
Thank you. Committee questions for the revisor? Seeing none, do we have a motion? Yes, Senator Gossage.
Madam Chair, I move we pass out favorably Senate Bill 367 from this committee.
Is there a second? We have a second from Senator Haley. Discussion on the motion?
The only question I had, and I think we had this discussion before, just refresh my memory, is it looked like there's a time limit on notifying, there's a time limit before they dispose of the gun. Is there a time limit for them to notify someone that their, say, a stolen weapon has to be returned for notification purposes? Is it just as soon as possible, or leave it discretionary to the law enforcement agency? Just kind of curious on that.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jason Thompson with the Revisor's Office. So there are two provisions that relate to return, and I kind of glossed over the first one. My apologies. The first one is in subsection A. That's on line 15 of page 1. That's the general provision that if no criminal charges are filed or prosecution is declined, then property that's seized shall be returned to its rightful owner or disposed of in accordance with this section. And that catch-all is there because depending on what kind of property it is, that triggers different rules for who can have it back, or whether it has to be destroyed, or what the time frame might be, right? So the trigger there in subsection A is the general rule. Subsection C has the disposition of most property, and there's not really a time frame provided in subsection C. It's more sort of promptly, or when the court can make a decision. If the court's involved, in this case the court wouldn't really be involved, it would just be the agency. But then specific to the firearms in subsection D, there is a current law provision about 30 days. So that's at the bottom of page 3. So if your weapon was seized, and the violation for which it was seized is you're not convicted of that, essentially, or you're not required, or it's not required as evidence anymore, then it triggers a 30 days after the declination or conclusion of prosecution, including any period of appeal, and the law enforcement agency is required to verify, can you have it back? And if you can't have it back, what should we do with it? So it's a long way of saying there's not a general rule, but for firearms, there's a very specific 30-day rule.
Okay. That explains it. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I recall that discussion as well. Thank you for bringing that up. On page 1, then, when we're not talking about the return of weapons, we're talking about other property at lines 15 through 17 on page 1, there's no time requirement for the return of that property. Is that correct, Mr. Revisor?
Madam Chair, Jason Thompson again. No, there is no specific time frame provided there. Like I said, it would trigger the time frame if it's a firearm. Pardon the pun there, I didn't mean to do that, but we do have the provisions in subsection C, and I'm looking again just to make sure I didn't miss one, but that's, property stolen, embezzled, et cetera, returned to the owner, restored to the owner, unless otherwise provided by law. The last catch-all in C is it's disposed of in such manner as the court shall direct, but I don't see any specific time frame there. I only see one in subsection D related to firearms. And I can tell you from my notes here, looking at whether we could insert some sort of 60-day or 30-day requirement, the drafting problem potentially was just that you're dealing with so many different kinds of property. It's a little tricky to put in a time frame other than maybe that they have to make a decision about the return of the property within a certain amount of time, right? Because in some cases, they can't return the property. It's contraband. It has to be destroyed. Or it's, an explosive that has to be dealt with in a certain way under the provisions of subsection C. So I could try to put something in there if that's what the committee wants. Obviously, that's the policy choice that you would make. I just would caution that it's a little bit tricky because of the various kinds of property there, and it might might need a little massaging to get there.
Committee, any thoughts on that? Senator Gossage?
Yes, I guess I read that section to mean upon the determination that no criminal charges are filed and prosecution is declined, it should be returned immediately. I mean, once that's determined, no criminal charges are filed, prosecution is declined, property shall be returned to its rightful owner or disposed of in accordance with this section. I didn't see that to be controversial, but maybe I'm missing something.
Mr. Thompson, is there any requirement in the statute regarding immediacy or immediately? And if you're waiting for the return of your property, do you have any recourse if it's been 90 days, 120 days, 180 days? What would a citizen be looking at? And I guess the first question, is it required to be immediately? I think is the first question.
Madam Chair, Jason Thompson again. I'm not seeing any specific words about the promptness of it. This requirement, at least the new provision, is just shall be returned. It's not qualified in some way. And the only provision I'm seeing about time is in D with regard to firearms. So unless I'm just completely missing it, I think the assumption is once it's no longer needed as evidence, they shall return it. So it's then an obligation, and if it's just taking up storage space or, whatever, then it should be given back or disposed of properly, not necessarily given back. To answer your second part of that question, what happens then? Well, if I'm asking for my property back and it's been that determination's been made, there are probably various actions I could ask a court to take to force the law enforcement agency to do that. One thought that I just had was like a quo warranto kind of petition saying this official is not doing what they're supposed to do, order them to do it. That's one thing you can ask a court to do. So that's off the top of my head, one action you could potentially file if it came to that.
Thank you. Yes, Senator Haley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And continuing along this, I mean, is there something in here about the duty, or who has the affirmative duty to notify, and upon notice? I know it's talked about if it's a weapon being returned on page 3, going on to 4. But if there were a request made when there's nothing, getting back to the instant question, if a request were made when no charges are filed by the owner of the property, how immediate from that request then could it be inferred that the property would be returned? In other words, if the property owner doesn't know that they have a right to immediately get, or however, whenever it is, get their property back, where's the notice, I guess, or when does the duty arise for the property to be returned by law enforcement? Do they have to ask for it? That's what I'm saying. Do they have to request it, or is it the duty of law enforcement to make sure that they return it?
Mr. Thompson.
Madam Chair, Jason Thompson again. So the duty is placed on law enforcement by the shall. I mean, that's just my drafting perspective anyway. The property shall be returned, right? So that triggers a duty on behalf of the agency. But as far as the property owner knowing, the only thing that they're required to get is the receipt when the property is seized. So if it's seized without a warrant, the person gets a receipt. And then if it's seized with a warrant, the court also gets a receipt. So you're essentially asked to follow it yourself, I think. I mean, my property's been seized. I have to keep an eye on when I can get that back. But again, the law enforcement agency does have an obligation to return it or dispose of it if no criminal charges are filed or if some other provisions are triggered in the section.
Committee, further questions or discussion on the motion? So we do have a motion that's been seconded to pass this favorably out. And if we're ready to vote on the motion, then we will. And seeing no further discussion on the motion, all those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. The motion carries. We will next turn then to work Senate Bill 408, which is increasing the criminal penalties for multiple thefts of mail. 408. Sorry, and a bill brief from the reviser. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jason Thompson, Revisor's Office. So Senate Bill 408, to help you find your notes, February 8th is when you heard that one, just a couple days ago. This is similar to, actually identical, I think, to House Bill 2229 from last session. That didn't make it over here, but it is something that was considered in the House last session and reported out of committee, but not ever brought above the line. So it's back as Senate Bill 408. The main provisions are just to add to the Theft Statute, KSA 21-5801, a new sentencing provision that provides if property that is stolen is mail of a value of less than $1,500, and it's done from 3 separate locations within a 72-hour period as part of the same act or transaction, or it's done in 2 or more acts or transactions connected together or constituting parts of a common scheme or course of conduct, that theft is a severity level 9 non-person felony instead of a Class A non-person misdemeanor. So the general rule for theft is anything under $1,500 in value is a Class A misdemeanor. This would provide that if it's mail, which is broadly defined as lots of packages or things from the Postal Service or other delivery service, it becomes a severity level 9, even if it's only a value of less than $1,500, if you can prove that multiple occurrences in 72 hours or multiple occurrences as a common scheme or some connection between the occurrences. I think that's it. I'll stand for questions.
Committee questions for the reviser? Seeing none. Do we have a discussion or motion? Yes, Senator Baumgartner.
Oh, there we go. Thank you, Madam Chair. I move we pass out Senate Bill 408 favorably for passage.
Do we have a second? Senator Thompson. Committee, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, then, we've all heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. The motion carries. Committee, before our 11:25 break, we will finally then turn for today to Senate Bill 368, requiring registration as a sex offender for violations of the crime of internet trading in child pornography or aggravated internet trading in child pornography. With that, we'll ask for a bill brief from the reviser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jason Thompson, Revisor's Office again. Senate Bill 368, got a lot of numbers here, making sure I'm on the right one. This was heard February 7th, according to my bill brief anyway. This is the bill that requires registration as a sex offender for certain violations of the crime of internet trading in child pornography or aggravated internet trading in child pornography. You may recall that we added this crime, the legislature added this crime to the criminal code just a few years ago. When it was added, We did not add a corresponding provision in the Offender Registration Act, so the proponents were telling you that in order to require registration for this offense, you have to use the mechanisms in the act, such as proving it was sexually motivated and triggering a requirement in that way. The crime itself is not included as an offense requiring registration right now, and to remedy that, they've proposed that you add this crime to the definition of sexually violent crime in KSA 224902, so that it triggers the definition of sex offender for these folks that commit this crime, and then amend KSA 22-4906 to require registration as a sex offender for 25 years if convicted of the crime of internet trading, or aggravated trading when the victim is over 14 but less than 18, and then also to require registration for lifetime of the offender if they're convicted of the aggravated crime and the victim is less than 14 years of age. And the difference there is because the aggravated, when the victim is under 14, is a Jessica's Law offense. It's off-grid, and the corresponding crimes that are covered by Jessica's Law are also lifetime registration. So the policy choice they're asking you to make is to make that crime consistent with the other Jessica's Law crimes for registration, and then put the other ones in the 25-year registration category. I think that's it. I'll stand for questions if you have them.
Thank you. Committee questions for the reviser. Am I correct that the bill applies to offenders who are 18 years of age or older, or does it, if you could clarify that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jason Thompson again. And yes, great question. I clarified this at the time, and I forgot to mention it today. The crime itself of internet trading requires that the offender be 18 years of age or older. So the only folks that can be convicted of this crime are over 18. So the only folks who could be required to register for it would also be over 18. So there's no risk of a juvenile committing that crime, and also no risk of a juvenile being required to register for that crime.
Thank you. Committee, any other questions? Or yes, Senator Baumgardner.
Madam Chair, I don't have a question, but I do move we pass out, Senate Bill 368 favorably for passage.
Before I ask for a second on that, I'm going to entertain Senator Haley's question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I certainly support the motion that's being made. I just really want, by way of definition, what is aggravate, without being graphic? I just don't know what aggravated internet trading would be. Again, no graphics, I just don't know how that play. I understand all the aggravated for other forms, but how does that play out, or how is that defined?
Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jason Thompson again. So the crime in KSA 215514, and sometimes I provide these with the bill brief, and I didn't on this one. I'll try to remember to do that next time we're adding a specific crime, so you can look at the elements. So the regular version of the crime, the non-aggravated version, is committing sexual exploitation of a child when the offender is 18 or older, and then the offender knowingly causes or permits the depiction created from that exploitation to be viewed by use of an electronic device connected to the internet by any person other than the offender or the person depicted in the image. So essentially creating an image or depiction from sexual exploitation and then allowing someone else to see it. That's the regular crime. The aggravated crime is that same conduct when, by use of an electronic device connected to the internet, you permit a performance to be viewed. So it's not a single depiction, it's a performance, which is in the other crime, more action is depicted, and it's a more severe crime. So essentially it's triggered by the conduct of the sexual exploitation and the resulting depiction or performance that's created, and then distributing that further to any other person that becomes the new crime or the aggravated crime. And that's my very vague way of not talking about the images and depictions that are
concise definition, and appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, I appreciate your discretion there and how to describe all that. And yes, and then we do have a second for the motion from Senator Gossage. Committee, you've heard the motion. Any discussion? If none, then all those in favor of the motion signify yes. A question by Senator Gossage.
As part of discussion, Madam Chair, I just want to commend the very brave women who came forward and brought this to us. And I think we all would agree this is extremely important, and I'm not only a second, but very in favor of this bill.
Thank you, and I would agree as well. So thank you for sharing that. And then we are ready to vote on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. The motion carries. And committee, I promised we would be recessing at 11:25, and we are on schedule to do that. Given the work that we have done today, I think we can adjourn for the day, and we will see each other tomorrow at 10:30 then. Thank you very much, and we are adjourned.